Welcome, everyone. We're going to give people another moment to join, and then we'll get started. Welcome to our webinar today, When Students Talk, Students Learn, Leveraging the Maryland and DC Speaking Standards. My name is Helen Webster, and I've spent over 40 years working with schools on best practices to support student achievement. At Inspired Instruction, I'm an instructional strategist supporting schools in Maryland and DC. I'm excited to spend this time with you today because this is a challenge we're seeing across many schools right now. I'm joined today by my colleague, Odette Falone, who will help monitor the chat and questions. Please feel free to add thoughts or questions as we go. At Inspired Instruction, we work alongside educators to turn new learning into something that actually works in classrooms and makes a difference for students. Everything we're sharing today comes from our experience partnering with schools and seeing what truly sticks in practice. What if the secret to deeper learning in classrooms was simply giving students more time to talk? What we're seeing across schools right now is that more and more classrooms are relying on electronic devices and digital applications to engage students with far fewer opportunities for students to talk to each other. Many educators understand the importance of discourse, but they need support structures in place to help them implement these strategies within the confines of their curriculum. By the end of this session, you'll be able to leverage the Maryland and DC speaking standards to elevate student achievement through discourse, support the implementation of academic discourse by using a meeting framework and supports for teachers, and provide teachers with opportunities to reflect on their use of discourse to engage students. Take a minute and look at this quote. The person doing the talking is the person doing the learning. Based on your experiences, what are your thoughts about this? And just take a minute to think about it. In my experiences working with teachers, I found that many teachers avoid providing students time to engage with each other about the content. Students may talk to each other as they're completing work, but they don't talk about the work. In recent years, especially post-pandemic, I've seen even less discourse in classes. When I visit classes, students are often working on their devices by themselves. Teachers tell me that they don't have time in their curriculum to add discourse, that discourse derails them from their pacing guides. They'll say the kids can't handle it or that they'll just be off task. All of these things remind me that an amazing instructional practice is just not being fully realized. Today, we're going to focus on three basic questions regarding this issue. Why does discourse matter for student achievement? How can teachers be introduced to and engage with discourse strategies? And what strategies are needed to support teachers as they implement new practices? Student academic talk matters. In our lives, we most often work to solve problems and hear different perspectives through speech. Academic talk fosters learning in a number of ways. Among the many benefits, it allows deeper thinking as well as fostering creative thinking, critical thinking, and problem solving. It supports the development of communication skills. It's especially important for very young students, students with learning differences, and English language learners. It increases engagement and provides opportunities to hear multiple perspectives. Hearing other ideas is one of the main ways that our own ideas can adapt, grow, and transform. With academic talk, students grow in confidence and can work to improve their language development. Research has shown that academic discourse has a positive impact on student learning. One study found that discourse increases knowledge and reasoning skills and helps students build consensus. Another found that the frequency and quality of discourse had a significant impact on student performance on reading and literacy tests. John Hattie, the author of the book Visible Learning for Teachers, among other things, examined the talking that was happening in classrooms. He found that teachers were talking between 70 and 80% of the time, sometimes more. In an ideal classroom, the students should be talking that much. In addition, his work found that teachers were asking between 200 and 300 questions a day, compared to just 2 for students. In his work, Hattie also examined over 100 different instructional strategies and practices to determine the effect size on learning for each practice. He developed a barometer to show a scale of effectiveness. The red section, with effect sizes less than 0, are strategies that actually cause a decrease in achievement. Effect sizes in the yellow section are effects that are similar to the achievement students would have without any school. The orange area shows typical effects for 1 year of teaching. Finally, the blue area, 0.4 and higher, are the strategies and practices that accelerate student learning. The red star shows where discourse falls on the scale. It's at 0.82, a strategy that accelerates learning. The question becomes then, why are we not regularly using a practice that has such significant impact on student learning, and what do we do about it? I can't begin to tell you the number of times I've heard teachers say that they don't have time for discourse, that it's not part of the curriculum. Interestingly, discourse is specifically listed as part of the speech standards in both Maryland and DC and has connections across the curriculum. This is just one example of the connections between one of the speech standards and the reading, writing, and math curricula. This standard focuses on coming to discussions prepared, referencing evidence, and being able to talk, question, and reflect on the ideas being discussed. That speech standard directly relates to reading standards that require students to cite pieces of evidence to support their analysis, as well as writing standards that focus on developing claims and evidence. The speech standards also connect to the standards of mathematical practice, which are an overarching framework for all math instruction. In this case, the SMP requires students to make sense of problems, to reason abstractly, and to use precision by communicating clearly. Using discourse is the curriculum. It is a vehicle that supports students in processing their thinking and creating meaning from the content. Based on this, it is important that we work to shift our thinking about discourse. We want to move from a mindset that discourse is an add-on, taking away time from curriculum, and irrelevant because it's not on the DC Comprehensive Assessment of Progress in Education or Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program testing. We need to shift our thinking, beginning with instructional leaders, to the stance that discourse is an integral part of the curriculum intended to augment and strengthen student thinking. Being implemented. One way to do this is to lead by example. Introduce strategies in the context of meetings. Today, we'll be looking at a meeting framework that incorporates the intentional use of a discourse strategy, allowing staff to engage with meeting content while experiencing a new practice. The purpose is to give teachers firsthand experience and then provide the support they need to implement the same strategy in their classroom. This resource that you see on the right will be shared with you. It presents the meeting framework that you can use. We are going to go over each step of this process. The first step will be to identify the content of the meeting you will be using. Knowing the information the teachers are engaged with may impact the strategy you choose. The next step will be to select a low-risk, easy to implement, and universally applicable strategy the teachers will use as they engage with the content. You'll want to try something different, so move beyond think, pair, share, or turn and talk. The strategy should be straightforward so that it's easy for teachers to use. Also, it should be able to be used across all of your grade levels and content areas. You want to avoid a situation where teachers say, that won't work for my class. As you review the meeting outcomes and agenda, set the stage for the discussion process they will be using. This will let teachers know that you will be explicitly modeling a strategy during the course of the meeting. When introducing a new strategy, be intentional. Explain not only how the strategy works, but explain the rationale behind the strategy. By being intentional when explaining the rationale, you are providing guidance with how teachers would be able to use the strategy themselves. This kind of explanation should also be used when teachers are introducing the strategy to students. After the meeting starts, teachers will engage with the meeting content using your featured practice. Teachers will process information both individually and collaboratively during the course of the meeting. One resource available to you is an editable download of meeting slides that present the steps of the process. Once we review all of the steps, we'll look at these downloadable slides in a modified meeting simulation. Once all of the content has been reviewed and discussed, provide time for teachers to reflect on the process individually and then in small groups. Some possible questions might be, how did the strategy help you process content individually? How did the strategy help you collaborate with others and hear diverse perspectives? How did this process help you extend, validate, clarify, or transform your own thinking? And what are some of the ways that you could use this strategy or a variation of it in your classroom? Debriefing gets the teachers to talk about the strategy instead of just doing it. They are reflecting on how it impacted their learning and asks them to consider how they would use it in the future. This last question is probably the most important because it requires teachers to think about discourse in reference to their own teaching. If the goal is to increase student talk in the classroom, make sure you provide specific next steps about how teachers will be implementing the strategy in their classes. Make sure you provide a specific and realistic timeline. You should also share the supports that will be provided to help the teachers be successful. As teachers are beginning to use the strategy, give them time and space to take risks, trying something new and maybe outside their comfort zone. For that reason, support and feedback should be informal and non-evaluative. One major support for teachers will be classroom visits with feedback. These visits provide teachers the opportunity to hear about the implementation of the focus strategy. Using a capture sheet is an excellent way to focus the visits on a specific topic, providing feedback on identified look-fors. This capture sheet, which is a resource available to you, uses the DC and Maryland speaking standards as the look-fors. The capture sheet lists each of the speaking objectives and provides the space to identify if it was observed or not. In addition, there's a space for notes detailing what the teacher did or said to facilitate that objective. For the first objective listed, an example of the notes might be that the teacher had provided a purpose-setting question and asked students to list one piece of evidence from the text that supported that question. Students then needed to bring the evidence to their group for discussion. The last part of the process is engaging in a follow-up conversation. After the class visits have happened, arrange for teachers to meet in their PLCs to share their experiences with using the strategy in their classrooms. You can give them focus questions such as what went well, what needs to be upgraded, what was the impact on student learning and engagement. These conversations allow teachers to share their best practices and try to troubleshoot problems that they may have had. It's another opportunity for them to talk explicitly with colleagues about this strategy. It's also modeling the very behavior we want students to use. Now, we just reviewed a lot of information. I'd like you to take a minute to stop and jot down an idea, a thought, or a connection that you have about the meeting framework. And this stop and jot that I'm asking you to do is actually the discourse strategy that is used in the editable meeting slide. So I'm just going to give you a minute to jot something down. Now, at this point, if this was a meeting instead of a webinar, we would work in small groups to share ideas in order to identify a single concept that each of the groups feel would support everyone's learning. Now, we're going to take a look at the framework during a simulated meeting setting. I'll be using the editable slides I referenced earlier. As we are walking through the simulation, think about how you could use or adapt these slides for your own meetings. During the simulation, as much as I can, I will model what a meeting might look like and sound like using the framework we just reviewed. There will be times when I will make a sidebar or just explain the steps because we are in a webinar setting. So let's get started with our simulated meeting. Welcome. Today we're going to be focusing on the student climate survey data in order to make some decisions about school improvement for the upcoming school year. During the meeting, we will be engaging with content related to analyzing climate survey data, using an academic discourse strategy called Stop and Jot to process content both individually and collaboratively, and analyzing and synthesizing content in order to make recommendations for school improvement meetings and planning. As part of our work, as I mentioned, we will be using a discourse strategy to help process information from the survey. Using discourse is a wonderful way for all of us to actively engage in the content, and it supports the DC and Maryland speaking standards. Today's work will address a number of these objectives, such as coming to discussions prepared and referencing evidence to probe and reflect on the ideas being discussed, posing, responding, and commenting to questions with elaboration and detail, reviewing key ideas expressed and understanding different perspectives, and distinguishing claims supported by reasons from those that are not. The strategy we will be using today is one that is easy to implement and can be used across grade levels and content areas. With Stop and Jot, we will examine a chunk of information and then stop at a predetermined spot. At that time, you will jot down any ideas, thoughts, connections, or questions that you have about what we reviewed. We will then process your ideas in small groups and synthesize our learning. This strategy allows learners to process information both individually so that everyone has ideas to bring to discussions, and as a group so that multiple perspectives can be shared to shape and refine our thinking. This is a strategy that can be used anytime to help learners chunk information and summarize their learning. In just a minute, I'm going to present one piece of data from the climate survey. As you review the data, list any thoughts, ideas, connections, or questions that you have on a Post-it. Each idea should be put on a different Post-it. So if you have 3 ideas, 3 different Post-its. Once we've finished, you'll be sharing your ideas in your small groups. This is a chart showing a big picture summary from the data from the survey. This is showing the percentage of students in grades 6 through 12 reporting a positive response, either strongly agree or agree, on the items related to each topic. Each topic had several related questions, so this is a summary of all responses. Take a look at the data and use Stop and Jot to write down at least one idea, thought, connection, or question. I'll give you about 15 seconds to jot something down. Now, just as a sidebar note for you, there is a placeholder slide in the downloadable presentation where you can add your own data, your own information, and your own associated links. Now, at this point, I'm going to describe what the next step will look like since we won't be going into small groups. Teachers will bring their Post-its to their small groups. The group's ultimate goal will be to identify one idea from the group that they feel is the most important learning for us as a school as we work for school improvement planning. Giving the group a specific task to complete is critical with this course. Once teachers are in groups, ask each person to share their ideas, and then the group can discuss which idea or synthesis of ideas is the most important. The groups will need to turn in their idea on a Post-it so that it can be used for planning. And again, that's part of that, giving them a purpose and a reason for working in their groups. This is an example of one group's conversation. The teachers were commenting on the fact that most of the areas scored 50% or higher, and that was really positive. The conversation shifted when one person stated that even though 73% for safety seemed really good, that meant that 27%, over 1/4 of the students, didn't feel safe. The conversation turned then to why that might be the case. The group decided that their Post-it would ask the question, what is it exactly that is making some students feel unsafe? The conversation caused the initial thinking and analysis to be transformed because of the various perspectives. This is what discourse should do. Now, in a staff meeting, it's likely that you'll have multiple pieces of information to process. If that's the case, you would go back to the next chunk of information for a new sequence of stop and jot, followed by a group conversation. So we're going to move on with our simulated meeting. Now that we've processed this information from the survey, and we've collected the ideas that you think are most important as we continue school improvement planning, let's spend a few minutes debriefing the process. Talking about strategies is extremely important as we are learning new practices and reflecting on how we can use them in our own lessons. Take a minute to think about the following questions. Jot down your ideas so that you can share them as we move to small groups to debrief. How did the strategy help you process the content individually? How did the strategy help you collaborate with others and hear diverse perspectives? How did this process help you extend, clarify, validate, or transform your own thinking? And what are some of the ways you could use this strategy or a variation of it in your classroom? Now, we would have the teachers think about this individually, and then they would move into small groups to talk about it. And just a note for you, you can use these questions or adjust them to meet your needs. The one question to leave as is would be that last one, to have them reflect on how they would use it in their classrooms. As the last step of the meeting, provide teachers clear next steps focused on the expectations for them implementing the strategy and the supports that will be available to them. This chart would summarize those next steps. So in the green section, you'd identify the school's details about planning for the strategy. What is the time frame you expect the strategy to be used during the lessons? And this is just an example of what it might look like. And you would give the specific date. So be very specific about the time frame for teachers. In the blue section, explain class visits, what they are and when to expect them. Emphasize that these visits are informal, providing some initial feedback as teachers begin using the practice. And here's an example of what it looks like. You would just overview what the expectations and what they can think would be happening for the class visits. In the orange section, explain how PLCs will get together after the lessons have been implemented to talk about best practices and upgrades, and provide the basic details about those PLC meetings. And finally, and maybe the most important, is to tell the teachers about the supports that will be provided so that they are able to be successful as they try something new. These might include planning support, providing modeled lessons, having a video of the strategy being used, co-teaching, or any other supports that you can think of. Having a specific and realistic plan in place when you introduce the strategy will be helpful as you ask teachers to try that new practice. One thing to remember about implementing a framework that can get tricky is time. Remember that this is a process and requires everyone, school leaders and teachers, to make changes to their current practices. Providing the time and support at all levels is essential in helping build a culture that elevates academic discourse. So let's come back to what matters most. When students talk, students learn. Today, one of our key takeaways is that academic discourse is a critical practice to support student learning. Not only is it identified specifically in the Maryland and DC literacy standards, research has shown that it has a positive impact on student achievement. In addition, providing a framework that introduces and models discourse strategy, as well as supporting teachers as they plan, implement, and reflect on their use of the academic conversations, will help create a culture where student talk is used to facilitate student learning. As you reflect on the takeaways from today's webinar, think about one small way that you could try something that we've discussed in the next 48 hours. Take a minute to think about it and jot it down. Research also shows that by writing something down, we're more likely to remember it and to do it. And if you need some suggestions, one might be you could get a big picture of school-wide trends focused on using academic discourse by using the Look For sheet that I shared and conduct class visits. This will help give you a timeline or give you a baseline of what discourse looks like in the classrooms. This is something that you could do these last days of the school year, or you could plan now and put it on the calendar for the early weeks of next school year. You could also look at the content of your next staff meeting and see how you can use the stop and jot strategy slides or substitute it for any discourse strategy to model effective discourse with your staff. Now, during today's webinar, I referenced 3 specific resources that can support you as you use the meeting framework. After today's meeting, all participants will get a recording of this webinar and links to these resources. The first was, and let me go back. The first was Modeling Discourse Strategies During Meetings. And this is a framework that we used to review and provide steps in modeling a new strategy for teachers. The next one would be Introducing Discourse Strategies in Meeting Presentation Template. This provides a link to an editable set of Google Slides that you can use and adapt for your own meetings. And finally, the Maryland and DC Speaking Standards Discourse Look For sheet, which can be used for informal class visits to identify what teachers say or do to facilitate standard objectives. As you continue this work, know that you don't have to do this and figure it out on your own. We're always happy to be a thought partner if you want to talk through ideas or challenges. Please take a minute to use the link in the chat to share your feedback today. Your opinion is very important to us. And also, if you have any questions and you'd like to ask them now, feel free to raise your hand or add them to the chat and we can take a few minutes to answer them. As we're finishing up, I want to thank you so much for joining us and wish you a wonderful end of your school year and a very happy summer. And here are some resources if you would like some further reading.